You made me believe in something I didn't think I deserved.
Daniel Reed lived by numbers, schedules, and calculated moves. He wasn't cruel, just efficient. His days were spreadsheets, his nights were silence, and his emotions were locked away like outdated software. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled unless it was for a press photo. But in a world ruled by perception, even cold logic had to wear a warm mask sometimes. The invitation to the gala wasn't what rattled him. It was the memo that came with it. Investors wanted to see more than a genius. They wanted to see a man they could trust, a husband, a family man, someone relatable. As if boardroom brilliance wasn't enough anymore. That's when the idea struck. Not as inspiration, but as strategy. He wouldn't fall into the trap of real connections. Instead, he would manufacture one. A woman on his arm, not in his heart, a role to be cast, played, and ended after the curtain closed. The contract would be clean, the terms precise. Love wasn't part of the budget projection, Daniel thought. About this like a campaign, branding, optics, performance. He didn't need passion, he needed presence. The presence of a wife would soften his image, make the company more human, and quiet down nosy stakeholders. Business was war, and this was his armor. Cold but effective. People like Daniel often believe they've outgrown the need for tenderness, like it's a weakness in a world of mergers and market dominance. He had built walls, not just to keep people out, but to keep himself from remembering how it felt to care. He convinced himself emotions were distractions, dangerous, unnecessary, even costly. But deep down, hidden beneath his crisp suits and rehearsed statements, there was a man who once believed in something softer. A boy who once waited for his mother to come home, who once dreamed of a future filled with more than just profit. That boy had been buried under years of discipline. But some ghosts linger, no matter how tight the spreadsheet is balanced. So, when the assistant handed him a list of potential wives for hire, Daniel skimmed through it like resumes. Polished, perfect, predictable, just the way he liked things. Until a profile popped up. One that didn't fit the pattern. One that unintentionally would threaten the very structure he built. But he didn't know that. Not yet. Emily Parker wasn't looking for fairy tales. She was looking for rent money. Life had turned her once bright dreams into daily negotiations. Between food and electricity, her talent was undeniable, but talent didn't pay bills, not in this city. She juggled auditions with waitressing, and every maybe from a casting call chipped away at her hope. But she kept showing up, because that's what resilience looks like. Her little brother, Max, was the reason she hadn't given up. After their parents passed, she became everything he needed. Sister, guardian, provider. She had learned to smile when she was tired, to perform even when the audience was just one boy eating cereal before school. That kind of strength doesn't win awards, but it holds families together. That's a real story, not the kind you see in movies. So when she stumbled upon the casting for a wife, she laughed out loud. The description was vague, the pay suspiciously generous, and the situation honestly absurd. But absurdity wasn't new to her. She'd played trees, witches, even a background dancing spoon once. This was just another role, another shot. One more emotional story she never planned to star in. Her audition was the opposite of polished. She forgot her lines, tripped over a chair, and even made an offhand joke about Daniel's picture looking like a wax figure. But she was real, unapologetically real. And Daniel, for all his formulas and filters, noticed it wasn't charm. It was something he couldn't quantify, something that made him pause. Emily didn't expect to get the part. And when she did, the offer felt surreal. 3 days, first-class everything, a wardrobe she could never afford. The contract said, no emotional involvement, which made her laugh again, as if feelings obey contracts. But she signed anyway, pen trembling just slightly, because for once she could breathe. It felt strange, preparing to be someone else when she barely had time to be herself. The wife of a CEO role came with notes, backstories, even memories she didn't own. But as she memorized the fake meet-cute and honeymoon photos, a small part of her wished it was hers. Not the wealth, but the warmth that love was supposed to bring. Touching stories have a way of creeping into the cracks of real life. Emily reminded herself this wasn't her story. She was just passing through 3 days and done. Still, the way Daniel looked at her during the briefing, like he wasn't sure if hiring her was genius or madness, made her curious. Not about the job, but about the man behind the cold eyes. And curiosity, as she would learn, rarely walks alone. The script was clear. They met at a tech expo in Berlin, shared a laugh over spilled coffee, and fell for each other during a stormy walk through Central Park. It was all made up, of course, but they rehearsed it like gospel, fine-tuning the details until even they almost believed it. Daniel approached it like a merger, precise, efficient. Emily, however, added color he didn't expect. She crafted subtle gestures, a way of holding his hand, a nervous giggle after an inside joke. These weren't in the notes, but Daniel didn't stop her. Somehow, those unscripted pieces made the whole thing feel less like fiction. He hated how often he caught himself watching her instead of the room. A part of him wanted to understand why she made the story feel like a touching one. Emily, too, noticed the cracks in his armor. His rare smiles weren't practiced. They were instinctive. The first time he laughed, it caught them both off guard. It wasn't loud, but it was real. The kind of laugh that sounds like it forgot how to exist. She didn't mention it, but it stayed with her, like a line from an emotional story that plays on loop in your heart. They memorized how to gaze into each other's eyes at the right moments. But sometimes, those looks lingered. And when their hands brushed during a photo shoot, it wasn't part of the scene, but neither pulled away. Daniel found himself wondering what Emily's real laugh sounded like when she wasn't acting. Emily, in turn, started wondering who he'd be without all the walls. At one point, between events, they waited alone in a hotel hallway. Daniel adjusted her earring, fingers trembling slightly, and for a moment, they stood too close. Neither said a word. But in that silence, something shifted, like gravity pulling them toward a truth neither wanted to name. Real story moments don't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes they whisper. They both kept telling themselves it was pretend. Just a show, just 3 days. But Emily had seen enough of the world to know when someone was aching for something more. And Daniel, for all his control, began craving her presence even outside the role. He noticed how she talked to staff, how she comforted a nervous intern. These weren't rehearsed. They were who she was. As the gala approached, the performances grew more effortless. In public, they were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, they were two people quietly wrestling with a feeling they never rehearsed for. And somewhere in the middle of the make-believe, the line between actor and character began to blur, just in time for the biggest stage of all. The night of the gala arrived like a storm in slow motion. Lights, cameras, whispers, and a sea of expectations. Emily descended the stairs in a gown chosen by Daniel's team, but her presence made the designer fabric irrelevant. She didn't just look the part, she owned it. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't thinking about metrics. He was watching her like a man afraid of blinking. Investors were enchanted. Clients leaned in. Reporters scribbled more about Emily's grace than Daniel's keynote. She laughed at the right moments, remembered names, and even quoted Daniel's past interviews with a wink that made him seem almost charming. She humanized him in a way he couldn't have orchestrated, and he was too stunned to feel in control. Emily wasn't playing a role anymore. She was connecting naturally, and Daniel realized he hadn't coached her for this effortless magnetism. She spoke to people with a warmth that couldn't be faked. That's what makes touching stories powerful. They don't follow scripts. They live in the unscripted moments that catch you off guard and make you care. Late into the evening, after the last photo and final toast, they found themselves alone by the balcony. The noise had faded, but something lingered between them. Daniel looked at her differently now, not as a solution, but as someone who'd opened a door he hadn't known was shut. And Emily, for once, didn't have to perform. She just stood there being herself. He asked her why she did so well tonight. She said softly, "Because for a moment I forgot it was fake." Daniel didn't respond right away. His silence wasn't cold. It was full of thoughts, questions, and that unfamiliar flutter of feeling. They stood side by side, pretending to admire the view while actually wondering what this moment meant. There, under the soft wash of city lights, something passed between them. Not a declaration, not even a promise, just a presence, a warmth, a pause in their carefully choreographed dance. Daniel thought about how often he'd avoided this very feeling, but now, standing so close to it, he wasn't sure he wanted to turn away. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the kind of moment that makes emotional stories memorable, the kind that shifts something in your chest and refuses to leave. And even though the gala was over and the cameras had turned away, they both knew quietly, undeniably, that something unspoken had just begun, and unspoken things have a way of demanding answers. It happened casually, like most revelations do. A reporter with a sharp memory and a sharper tongue tilted her head and asked, "Didn't I see you in the last curtain off Broadway?" The words hit harder than Emily expected. She froze for just a second. Daniel, standing beside her, caught the hesitation, and his instincts flared. Later, behind closed doors, the calm broke. Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though the real question was buried deeper. "Was this all a game to you?" Emily tried to explain, but truth always stumbles when met with suspicion. Her voice trembled, not with guilt, but with something raw. "I never meant to lie," she said, her eyes already wet. "I was hired to act. I just didn't expect to feel anything real." Daniel flinched, not because of the words, but because he recognized them. That ache, that confusion, it mirrored his own. She hadn't betrayed him with her resume. She had betrayed the agreement, no emotions. But hadn't he done the same? The room filled with silence, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that says something has broken. Emily didn't beg, she didn't plead. She simply stood there, stripped of pretense, waiting for a man who demanded authenticity, but feared it when it showed up. Real story moments don't always come wrapped in warmth. Sometimes they arrive wearing conflict and vulnerability. Daniel turned away, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Caring wasn't part of the plan. The plan was clean, calculated, controllable. But feelings, they're messy, loud, unpredictable. He hated that he missed her, even while she was still in the room. And that, more than anything, scared him. Emily wiped her tears, not to hide them, but to free herself. "You weren't the only one pretending," she whispered. "But I stopped pretending the moment I started seeing you." That sentence lingered longer than either of them admitted. Because once truth slips through, you can't push it back behind the curtain. She left that night, not with drama, but with dignity. No last glance, no closing monologue. Just silence and the distant echo of what could have been. But as she disappeared into the night, something stayed behind in Daniel's chest, something unresolved. And unresolved things don't fade quietly, especially when they matter. The office felt colder without her, not literally, but in the way silence presses on your ribs when something's missing. Daniel tried to bury himself in numbers again, in meetings and forecasts, but none of it worked, because once you taste something real, returning to artificial flavors is unbearable. Emotional stories don't end when people walk away. They linger where their presence used to be. Days passed, but she stayed in his mind. Not as the fake wife from the gala, but as the woman who turned a contract into a connection. He remembered her jokes, her laugh, the way she saw through him without trying to fix him. Daniel had everything except peace. And peace, he learned, doesn't live in penthouses. It lives in authenticity. One afternoon, driven by something he couldn't label, he walked into a small cafe near the theater district. And there she was, apron on, hair up, smiling at a customer like she'd never once stood in heels beside a billionaire. She didn't see him at first. He just stood there, watching. It was humbling, seeing her in her world. A world that didn't revolve around him. When she finally turned, their eyes met, and everything unsaid surged between them. He approached slowly, not as a CEO, but as a man with no agenda. "You made me believe in something I didn't think I deserved," he said, voice quieter than usual. No speech, no sales pitch, just truth. And sometimes truth is all you need to start again. She didn't smile right away. Her guard was up, and rightly so. But then she saw it. He wasn't acting. There was no role left to play. The contract was over, but something new was asking to begin. Something uncertain, fragile, terrifying, and beautiful. Real story endings are never clean, but maybe that's what makes them worth it. They sat for hours, no cameras, no crowd, just two people talking like it was their first real conversation. He listened more than he spoke. She laughed more than she cried, and for once the world outside didn't matter, because healing sometimes starts not with apologies, but with presence. With being there when you don't have to be. Daniel didn't promise her the future. He asked to build one, with no scripts, no fake smiles, just them. And she, tired of pretending, said yes. Not because he was perfect, but because he showed up, flawed and honest. And sometimes that's the most touching story of all, the one where people choose each other without needing to pretend. Have you ever fallen for someone in a moment that was never supposed to be real? Do you think love can grow from something built on a lie? Or is it exactly in the most unexpected, unplanned situations that we find what's truly real? Sometimes the heart chooses before we're even aware there's a choice to be made. And when it does, would you have the courage to follow it? Let me know in the comments. What would you do if you were in Daniel's place? Would you chase after someone who walked away, or would you bury the feeling just to protect your pride? If you felt anything watching this emotional story unfold, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. We've got more touching stories and real story moments waiting for you in the next chapter.